I stand here alone with my head in my hands. Been gone so long, I can't remember where I've been. I'm thinking about back at home, my family and friends. My brothers don't know that I'm there till the end. It's one thing that we all know. It's one thing we all know. No man's left behind. You've seen me once, you've seen me twice. I fight alongside my brothers. There's no man is left behind.
I was in really 4 camps. I was first in jail, and then I was in Terezin in Czechoslovakia. Then I was in Auschwitz II, which is known as Birkenau. Then I was in Auschwitz I, which was for German criminals. Then I was on a death march, 7-day death march, and I ended up in the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria.
How do you feel about PTSD in combat versus PTSD you might have experienced?
Well, I think there is a basic difference between the two. In combat, people are for a very brief period in combat. They are never for months and months on end. It's usually a few days or maybe a week or so. And they are under very high pressures. And obviously, when that pressure ceases, then they tend to snap. In the camp, we were for years under extreme pressures. And we had pressures every day, and the possibility of being killed the same day or the next day was always there, because all they had to do is they had to lead you from one camp to a couple of 100 feet away to the gas chambers, or as when we were in Mauthausen, they simply cut off the food, and people started dying and getting diseases. So there was a chance of dying every single day. And after a while, we got used to these scares. They become daily routine. And I don't know of any Holocaust survivor who had post-traumatic stress after the war. I always attributed that to the fact that when we came home, number one, there was no home, and number two, we came into completely strange countries, although they may have been our homeland at one point, but by the time we came home, they were under Russian or some other domination, and all the familiar faces, particularly families and so on, had disappeared. So now we had to fight for ourselves. We had to find a place where to sleep, and we had to find food. We had to get some sort of an education. We had to grow up. We were away from civilization anywhere from 2 to 4 years. So it was a completely different situation. Now, I mentioned that I don't know of any ex-camper who ever had post-traumatic stress. There are two items I'd like to discuss in reference to that. I was in a partisan boarding school. This was a school in Yugoslavia that had ex-soldiers who had been in battle, and they stayed there and they were educated, and I stayed there for about a year. And there were many, many young soldiers who had suddenly had nightmares, were getting up in the middle of the night, were screaming and running around and so on. And I couldn't understand that. And they obviously had been battle scarred because they had all been fighting the Germans. Coming back to the camp, people had post-traumatic stress in the camp. And those who survived the camp had been in so long that there was that the whole experience stopped being traumatic. It became a routine type of an experience. There were many, many people in the camp who had this post-traumatic stress. And that was basically divided into two distinct groups. In Auschwitz, there was one group that simply threw itself against the electrically charged barbed wire and committed suicide. And every day, for about half an hour, all the power was cut off, and the bodies were removed, and then the power was turned back on. That's the first group. The second group were people who became known as Musulman, which would be, in German, the translation would be Muslim. Why they were called Muslims or Musulman, I haven't got the slightest idea. But there were people who suddenly started to wander around the camp and just totally ignored everything. They just looked with blank faces and just stumbled along, and they were immediately picked up by some SS men and shot. So this is the two groups that we had.
How were you able to cope with those kinds of things? How did that...
Well, I was a young person. I don't know of any young person who had post-traumatic stress in the camp. The secret of survival in any of these situations is basically 3 points, which one has to remember. The first point is luck. And the second one is adaptability. We adapted ourselves to the situations. Young people always adapted themselves. It's the older people, and I'm talking about not in today's terms old, I'm talking about people in their late 30s, early 40s, who couldn't adapt to the situation because they had lost their families, they had lost their business, there wasn't anything to live for. And these people were the ones who cracked up, who committed suicide, who had probably the suicides were the result of post-traumatic stress, of hopelessness. So the second condition was that you didn't stand out, you didn't look different from the masses. You didn't fight with any of the prisoners who supervised us. You didn't look into SS men's eyes. There are certain things you just didn't do. Adaptability, not standing out, and luck. And young people managed to fit into that. We were lucky because they thought also that they could use us to do labor. But you had to be in a certain age range, for instance, above maybe 14 to 18. That was the most desirable age.
Your experience with PTSD was almost everything and everyone at that time, whether they knew it or were able to acknowledge it.
Well, there was a lot of it there,
Yeah.
but it was it was instantly reacted to,
Right.
and that entire experience, the camp, was a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
And the older you were, the more you realized the reality of it. Although we've seen death around quite a bit, we saw constantly dead bodies, and that was nothing new. We saw people being killed. It was still, it became a way of life. And you became extremely cold and indifferent. You couldn't there was no way you could get involved in it in any form, shape or size, because if you did, you were right next on the list of being killed.
There's nothing measurable for me to understand that with. That's a daily PTSD experience.
There was no doubt about it. It was a daily PTSD experience, but as I said, it was daily and for a long time, and so it stopped being a traumatic experience. It became a routine experience. It's just like a fireman who would daily go and fight fires. There may be some firemen who really can't take it after the first few times, but the others, to them, it's just routine. You look past the certain basic dangers, and you start ignoring these things. They disappear. For instance, I was on a death march. There were 60,000 of us. We walked over 3 days. We walked 35 miles and 15,000 died on that death march.
Wow.
In other words, we were sitting down and getting up, and people didn't get up, and assessment came and just shot them, and we just continued. And this went on day after day after day, and then we were loaded into open railroad cars, and we traveled for 4 days, and over half the people froze to death because it was winter 1944, which was the coldest winter on record in the 20th century. But none of us ever got emotionally involved in it, because there was exactly one choice, as long as it's not me, And then after a while, you don't give a damn anymore. You just don't care. We were walking on that death march, and I can still hear it today. People were next to me saying, help me, And you couldn't, because if you would have helped him, you would have helped the person for maybe an hour, half an hour or what, and then you too would have collapsed. So that nothing would have happened. And you stop, you get at such a low level in your life where you don't have a choice of acting, but it's the choices are living or dying. It's that low. Okay, so there is no question of morality, of ethics, of compassion, or any of these things. It becomes strictly self-preservation at its very lowest. Truly lowest. There's no altruism involved in it, because you know damn well that there is no way you could have helped the other person for any extended length of time. You wouldn't have been able to help that person for a day or 2 days, in our case maybe 6 days or 7 days. It was impossible. You know, I mean, totally. We didn't know, obviously, when this whole mess would stop. You know, you always think, hey, it's going to be over within the next 10 minutes or so, because you just reached your point of no return, so to speak. But obviously it wasn't, and physically, and we were, and that's the only thing that kept us going, and not emotional. We totally ignored it. We just listened to the command and just moved.
Well, that's definitely as low as a basic life.
Well, it was a question of life or death. There was nothing in between. There was no matter of consideration. And so some people write books and they go to great explanations, and maybe 30, 50 years later, which is all nonsense. You know, it's all just plain drivel, because you reach a stage where we didn't talk to each other because the energy of talking wasn't there, and there was nothing in the world that anybody could have told you that would have made any difference whatsoever to you, and just talking alone meant using extra energy, and it wasn't there. Now, you talk to a soldier who's been in the battle, and you know, where bullets are flying at him, and there's a comrade lying there somewhere. Ask him, you know, how much compassion and so on he could have.
Did it get so normal that there were no negative thoughts or anything after the fact, after the wartime? Did it become so normal it just continued, or?
No, no. I was so long involved in negative situations, self-preservation, that it became part of my life. But the beautiful part is that when the war was over, all that disappeared. All that disappeared, because if it would not have disappeared, I would have been a very cruel and ruthless individual. On the contrary, I'm extremely compassionate and understanding. I've been a boss for many years. I loved my employees, people who worked for me. I've never been ruthless, knowingly being ruthless, or trying to hurt them in any way.
Some, as you say, can deal with it better. Some, when the situation is gone, they can divorce themselves from the situation and continue. Some soldiers can't get it out of their heads, like the ones you told us about.
Well, there are people who've been in it. If you've been in it for a very, very short period of time, then you will have that reaction, and then you will have these suicides and these Muslims and stuff like that, because it's there for a short time. It's like people who've been in the World Trade Center. You know, it was a one-shot deal type of a thing, or people who've been somewhere in some major disaster. They were from normal to abnormal and then back to normal. We were from normal to abnormal and stayed there until abnormal became routine, became normal. Seriously, because if you didn't, then you wouldn't have survived. Adaptability, you see, and that is the real factor. If you have time enough to adapt yourself to that situation, then the abnormality becomes normal. When I was arrested, I ended up in jail for 6 weeks. And I had difficulty mentally adjusting myself to it the first few weeks.
How old were you?
I was 15. And I had great difficulty for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was jail, was proper jail with bars and other criminals locked up with me, number one. And number two, I didn't do anything. You see, I didn't sit and figure out what can I say to weasel myself out of the situation, you know. I didn't break a window, I didn't steal anything, you know. I couldn't blame anybody else. You know, I was arrested because I was Jewish. You know, I mean, how do you weasel yourself out of a situation like that, you know? You get arrested for being a Christian, go ahead, weasel yourself out, you know? And there are a couple of lions waiting for you in the backyard.
Exactly.
You know?
You can't stop yourself from being yourself.
Precisely. And in addition to this, at that point, I was convinced while I was in jail that every day somebody is going to come and say, "I'm sorry, we made a mistake. We let you home." I was convinced that this was going to happen. And once I found myself in the camps, you know,
I guess that's changed.
there wasn't anybody coming and telling me, "Whoops, we made a mistake." You know, once the lions start chasing you, nobody says,
Time to go, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's, you have to abandon all. I don't want, you know, I find it difficult to say. You definitely don't have to abandon your morality, but I think you have to accept other people's immorality. That's the thing.
Wow.
You know, it's not a question of giving up your own morality and ethics, but you have to accept the immorality of others. You cannot run around and say, "Oh, calamity, calamity, how can he do this? You know, where is the humanity of it all," and all that. You know, that doesn't work. You know, that's stupid, because those guys are some mean bastards, and there's no way of turning them away from their action and activities. And the more you scream and holler about it, the more you get upset and it won't change the situation. While we were in Auschwitz, we had a very funny saying. We said, "I'm happy that I'm in Auschwitz. If I wouldn't be happy, I'd still be in Auschwitz. Might as well be happy." It was a question of acceptance. This is it, and then finish. You know, make the best of it, because I don't care what you do, it's not going to change the situation one little bit, one iota, nothing. It will change the situation if you're miserable and depressed and all this other stuff. It will change the situation because your life will be more miserable and so on. But that's about as far as it will go. It was a question of positivity, hope, and ignoring it. I don't want to, the word would be ignorance, but I don't know what the verb would be for ignoring.
to ignore.
You know what I mean?
Sure, absolutely.
It's not ignorance.
It's not, no, the ignorance of the obvious, or ignoring what you need,
something like that.
what you need to ignore
Yeah,
to
yeah.
survive. I'm adapting the questions because your situation is so wonderfully powerful. In that
I'm making this up as I go along.
you're doing fine. You're doing fine. Normally I ask questions in a row. I'm done within a half an hour. You have story after story which is replete with examples. So those are the examples I take from, and I put them on the screen. At points your conversation will go on for a while. At other points it'll be cut, and then we'll put in another part of the conversation.
Why are you doing this?
Well, it's hard to say after having heard your stories, but I have PTSD. Mine came in part from my father, undiagnosed PTSD, so the way he acted I followed. Found out that wasn't normal. Started getting help for that. Realized that I have multiple situations in my past. I used to live in California. Been through multiple earthquakes. Been through 2 typhoons on the water in the Marine Corps.
They are very horrific things, but each of them, you see, was very short lasting.
Yeah.
And each of them was a big bang.
Yeah.
And each time you jumped, you know. And those of us in the camps, we started ignoring the bangs. You know, and that's it. It's like you probably, if you go around to some islands that have earthquakes or volcanoes, people start ignoring it.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah.
You know.
We ignored most earthquakes. We had a saying in California: if it's not above a 5, it never happened.
Well, there you are. There you are. Somebody
Just,
else.
you know.
Yeah.
And somebody else would flip out if it was 3, something that just moved the ground.
I lived in Zagreb, Yugoslavia, which was on a fault, and we had many earthquakes there. And I recall on one occasion, we had an earthquake, and we had some china on top of the cabinet, and it fell down, and it got smashed. And my mother came in the room, and I said to her, I didn't do it. That's all I did. You know, it's funny, I've never thought about this in all these years.
Yeah, one more reason.
I never told that story. It was from my childhood, and it's
Just the earthquake, the memory of the earthquake.
No, I mean, I must have been, I don't know what, 7 years old or something like that. But I've never ever, first time in my life, I ever told this story.
Well, I'm privileged, thank you.
Not that it wasn't a particularly great story.
No, but it was a good memory,
I think a lot of post-traumatic stress could possibly, I'm not sure, but, if you don't give people a chance to think about it, if soldiers, when they came out, were instead of released, people who came from battle situations, instead of being released to their homes, if they were put under strict military training or stuff like that, strict disciplines and put to work in certain areas, you would probably eliminate a lot of that stuff. It's just my thought.
Sure.
I find it that post-traumatic stress usually occurs when people have a chance to think about it. What the hell is... You take any person who works in a stressful job in the city, okay? And he works one day and it's stressful, he goes home, he sleeps, and the next day continues. These people don't suffer from post-traumatic stress.
True.
And I'm convinced that if I were a financial manipulator or something like that, my stress level will be just as high. You know, if I worked for a company that was losing money, you know, whether it's, automobile company or something like that, or whether my entire money is tied up in it, my stress will be probably exactly the same. But it's a long-term stress. They're never short-term stress. It's not that I'm telling you, hey, you just lost your money. Good morning, you got it back.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's people, if you put them under stress for any length of time, I think then the trauma stops being a trauma.
Yeah.
You take people who have been in jail for many years, you know, and I'm not talking about guilty, but not guilty. You know, take people been thrown into Chinese jails or Russian jails or those, you know, so one of those situations. Nothing, you know, Guantanamo Bay or you name it. I don't think any of these people ever come out, you know, in any way off the deep end.
Do you believe they come out changed?
Pardon?
Do you, excuse me, do you believe that they have come out as a changed person?
Oh, everybody changes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm definitely a different person
Sure.
than I came out. Then I went in. My idea of success is being happy, and my idea of success is not money. I never went after money. I made some money, but I was never a financial, you know, success per se. I earned my keep, and I was happy with it. You know, of course it changes. I met several people who were with me in the camp, who managed to survive, and we met for the first time, and I say for the first time, although I was with them at the time, I didn't know them because they spoke Czech and I didn't, you know, but we were exactly in the same situation. Exactly, we went through the same selections by Dr. Mengele and so on. And we met and we fell into each other's arms, and we immediately felt a certain kinship, and they were people I continue to be friendly with, and there's something that ties us together. I met a ex-GI who liberated me in Mauthausen. Well, he was a soldier.
Sure.
He was one of the group of soldiers who liberated the camp.
Sure.
I didn't know it then, and even if I would have known, he spoke English and I didn't, you know, so it's totally besides the point. But he arrived, he was in the camp the same time I was there. You know, I mean, he sold the camp, he liberated it, and so on. And we met, by sheer coincidence, we were at the Suffolk County Community College. He was supposed to be the speaker as a liberator and I as a prisoner, and suddenly I realized, hey, this guy liberated the same camp where I was, you know. And we met before, a couple of days before, for an interview by Newsday. And here was a man who was about 6 years older than I was. He was, I think, 23, I was 17. Yeah, he was a young kid, you know, He was in the military, he's been fighting, Battle of the Bulge, went through Europe, the whole bit, typical GI. Mm-hmm. And now these two old men, in their 80s, meet there, and we look at each other, and we shake hands, and we suddenly fall into each other's arms. There was a kinship, there was something that tied us together, and we kissed, and I didn't know who the hell the guy was. I think all of us who went through these experiences, these extreme experiences, realized certain things, that the most important thing, the only thing that you really have, that you really possess, is your relationship to others and what you have in your head. Everything else can disappear from 1 second to the next. The house that you have, that you live in, everything, whatever, it's all gone, The only thing that you have is you, and if you know a friend, that relationship between people and what you have in your head. Everything else is crap.
I've tended to agree with you for a long time.
No.
I understand the sentiment, though. I do.
Well, it's nothing deep.
No, but
nothing profound. I haven't said anything you haven't heard before.
True. But to hear it from your perspective makes a different spin for me. So I hear it and I reflect on my life and I say, wow, that's poignant. That makes a difference. That's where I was in these situations.
Yeah.
But it was for a brief second. When you have a prolonged experience like you did, it becomes, for lack of a better term, normal.
Yes,
to be abnormal and be in that situation.
It has to become normal, because if it does not become normal, you won't take it.
Yeah.
You see, you can't take this sort of a thing for any length of time as a novelty.
Right.
You can take novelties only for so long.
Right.
And either you accept it or you go kaflooey.
Yeah. That's true. So this whole project of mine started 2 years ago, trying to figure out what it was that I was doing this for. Hypervigilance, always angry, flash anger, just like that. Why am I angry over something minuscule? Where did this come from? And in finding out the situations and finding out others that have gone through this kind of thing, I figured out what it was that I had. It went from becoming something I wanted to write about to something I felt I should film, because there are others who have this experience, and maybe all the stories together will kind of give us, an impression to the future generations that we are human people going through traumatic times. Some are short, some are prolonged, but the reaction is the same unless it becomes normal. And if it does become the norm to be in that world, when you walk away, you are reborn in a fashion. Your life becomes a gift. You see it differently.
Yeah.